Hello, and welcome to Just Plain Wrong, the podcast where three Mennonite librarians discuss depictions of Amish, Mennonites, and other plain groups in pop culture. This week, Abby, Aaron, and I will be discussing the Weird Al Yankovic song, Amish Paradise, which recently turned 25 years old. Does that make you feel old or young? This is the question.
Definitely old.
Old.
Since we will be talking about a parody of a 90s song that was written for the movie Dangerous Minds, I thought I would ask you about movie music. So what is your favorite soundtrack, your favorite song written for a movie? The 90s did this a lot.
I can start. I decided to hone in on the 90s because otherwise the question was a little overwhelming to think about all the soundtracks ever made. And the 90s, perhaps it's because I came of age in the 90s, but I think the 90s had some really good ones. And I, as a young teen and member of the BMG Music Club, had a lot of them. I had a lot of CDs. So some of the ones that come to mind, like Grosse Pointe Blank, 10 Things I Hate About You, even Batman Forever. But the one that stands out that I would say is my favorite from that era is the Romeo and Juliet soundtrack. So they re-released the movie in 1996 with this cool modern take. It had Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and the soundtrack, I guess I haven't listened to it in a long time, but I suspect it holds up. And now I'm going to go find my CD and listen to it soon. So that's my vote.
At least for the 90s, I liked most of the really stupid music that was written for movies, mostly by Will Smith, like the Men in Black rap song. And I also thought that the song that he wrote for Wild Wild West was very catchy. And that was neither a good movie nor a good song. It has strangely good cast, but does not hold up on rewatching. But I'm going to give myself a bit of a pass because I was 9 and I thought that Wild Wild West was a pretty cool movie.
I have to agree. The Romeo and Juliet soundtrack was amazing. Another soundtrack from a similar era is that I was very kind of oddly into was the You Got Mail soundtrack, which I blame on my middle school impulse to buy CDs for discount as opposed to for content. However, that CD did introduce me to the Cranberries, which I still love to this day.
Moving on. So Amish Paradise is a Weird Al Yankovic song that parodies Coolio's Gangsta's Paradise, which was a popular song from the Dangerous Minds soundtrack. Amish Paradise was released in March of 1996 and made it all the way to number 53 on the Billboard's charts, making it Weird Al's 4th biggest hit and definitely his biggest hit of the 90s. There is a corresponding music video as well that you can view on YouTube. We aren't entirely sure how to handle music clips and copyright issues in our podcast yet, so for the time being, we're just going to read the lyrics to you when we need to quote it. We highly encourage you to head to YouTube, though, and check out the video. So what are your memories of the song when it was released? When did you first hear it?
I definitely can't pinpoint it specifically, but I would predict, given my tendency to come to things pretty late in the game, I'm going to go with late high school, which would say early 2000s. So I'm going to say probably at least 4 or 5 years after it came out, because that's usually at least that amount of time for me to pick up on things, at least in that stage of life. That said, I definitely remember getting quite into it and watching the video a number of times and being very into the lyrics. And I feel like it was just there in the consciousness. It was I went to a Mennonite high school and we talked about it and just people knew about it. It was very popular.
So for me, March of 1996, I was in 8th grade. I was 13. And frankly, this song came out at a time, I think 8th grade is horrible, but something that's true, I think, of most people in that time of life is you're searching for things that are yours, your songs and your movies and whatever. And because of the timing of this song, this became one of those things that I really latched onto. I have no memory of the first time I heard it, but I know that I owned the CD, though I could not find it when I was looking for it the other day. And I still to this day know all of the lyrics. I will refrain from proving that to you, but I do. And it just, I don't know why. I'm assuming partly because it spoke to like something that I identified with, like Mennonites and Amish culture. And I think just the age I was at, it became a very, I don't know, a song that I just really latched onto at that time in my life. So
I was a little too young to be caring about Weird Al or to understand the genius of Weird Al at that age. So I didn't actually hear the song or see the music video until college, which was the first time I was like really truly surrounded by Mennonites. And a friend of mine was like, "What do you mean you haven't seen Amish Paradise?" And then my world opened up. I was pretty into some of the other Weird Al things, like The Night That Santa Went Crazy and the American Pie parody that was about Star Wars. My brothers and cousins and I may or may not have made costumes for ourselves and made a video of us dancing to that song.
That is
I
amazing.
wish we had the footage, or maybe I don't.
I was just gonna ask.
I don't think we do. I think it has been lost.
Oh,
but
that's a tragedy. I would watch that.
Nothing like. See, there would have been 5 of us in handmade costumes in a barn dancing to a Weird Al parody song. We had a good time, I guess. I think it took us the better part of a day. Probably our parents were glad we were out of the house. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, moving on to the song itself, what lyrics stand out to you as the most interesting or are your favorite? Erin, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think it makes sense for me to start because I just really love that opening stanza. So it goes, "As I walk through the valley where I harvest my grain, I take a look at my wife and realize she's very plain. And that's just perfect for an Amish like me. You know, I shun fancy things like electricity." And I like the cadence. I think Weird Al really does have a special gift for parody because anyone can write a parody, but writing rhymes that aren't like forced and awkward is, I think, a real skill. And I think that opening stanza of the song really exemplifies that skill he has. So I don't know that they're like particularly insightful in any way into the Amish community or way of life, but I like the way that grain and wife is very plain rhyme. It makes me happy.
The opening is really great. As for me, I always like the lines that go, "Raised a barn on Monday, soon I'll raise another. Think you're really righteous? Think you're pure in heart? Well, I know I'm a million times as humble as thou art."
That's fun.
And I just love it because it connects to this thing, which is, I think can be true in the Amish community where there's a bit of a competition to see who's more plain, which can get maybe a little prideful. But I also just, as a Mennonite, felt like that really struck a chord in terms of our desire to, I'm more humble than you are, or these passive aggressive things that we can get ourselves into from time to time. So I've always loved those lines.
I was a pretty big fan of the witness callback, the line, "I ain't never punched a tourist, even if he deserved it. An Amish with a tood, that's unheard of." Because Harrison Ford's character punches a tourist. I also really like the rhyme, "I never wear buttons, but I got a cool hat, and my homies agree I look really good in black." Okay, so moving on. If we look at the song from a lyrical standpoint, what parts of it strike you as accurate or inaccurate?
Well, I actually think for a song that's kind of a joke, he does a pretty good job with accuracy. But a couple lines jumped out. Like there's a line about, "We sell quilts at discount price." And I guess I don't know a whole lot about quilt pricing, but I don't know that they sell them at discount price, at least not on purpose. Like the prices might be dropping as demand drops or whatever, but it's not like they're selling them at a discount. And also there's a line about, "There's no cops or traffic lights living in an Amish paradise." And I think we've touched on this in previous episodes, but I mean, it depends what community you're in. There might not be traffic lights, but there are certainly police officers in any community where there are also Amish people. So those sort of jumped out to me.
The thing that I noticed the most was that he's very much framed as Amish. He says that he's Amish in the first verse. But then when you get towards the end, the chorus part says, "We're all crazy Mennonites living in an Amish paradise." And my thought was, like, you can't be both at once. You're either Amish or you're Mennonite, unless you're talking about the sects of Anabaptists that are actually called Amish Mennonites. But he doesn't seem to be doing that here. So, that's my hair to split with this lyric.
But that's the line we can identify with the most, Tilly.
I mean, I guess my day-to-day living would seem to the Amish like a paradise. So I'm a crazy Mennonite living in what would be an Amish paradise. But I don't know that the Amish are living in an Amish paradise.
Whoa.
Or are they? Or does the paradise come later? I don't know.
You just broke my brain a little bit.
And actually, I don't know if this would be an inaccuracy, but I was flailing a little bit to try to think of something to say from the inaccuracies. And I actually very quickly looked up the date, because he has the line, "Then tonight we're going to party like it's 1699. And I was like, ooh, 1699. Was that really a date for Amish? But 1699 falls within the lifespan of Jacob Ammann, who is considered to be the, founder of the Amish. So kudos, Weird Al.
But I actually looked that up too, and I thought I jotted it down, but I forgot. I do take issue with we're going to party like it's 1699, because the Amish would be more like party like the early 1900s or maybe 1869.
1699 would not necessarily have been a happy time for Anabaptists and Amish. They would have been being, persecuted pretty severely. So I doubt many Amish would necessarily want to party like that particular time. So that's a fair point too.
There is also the line about how he doesn't want to get medieval on your hiney. And I was like, medieval, it's a little too early. Like Anabaptists didn't come around until, the Reformation, and usually the cutoff for the Middle Ages is, before that. So, and by Middle Ages, I mean medieval era. All right. So there may not be a whole lot of inaccuracy in the lyrics, but there is a lot in the video. Weird Al says that the accuracy was intentional. It was there for comedic effect, and that, quote, 90% of my perception was shaped by the movie Witness. So, with that in mind, what strikes you as accurate, inaccurate, or just funny about the video?
I think that, so in rewatching this for this podcast, the thing that jumped out to me was the weird product placement. Like there's a thing of cornflakes that show up in an early scene. And then they're also immediately after, I believe they're feeding pizza to some chickens. So those are definitely some details that I didn't necessarily pick up on the first time, or first several times. And I do kind of love the barn raising scene in this, obviously, which, as he says, is a clear send up of the witness, and but also very inaccurate. And the whole having it fall over on him is, I think, quite hilarious. One thing I also picked up more on, and we'll probably talk about some of this a little bit later when we talk about some issues of how this touches on issues of race, was there's a brief scene where Weird Al definitely appropriates Coolio's dreadlocks briefly, and that does not age well.
Along with everything Abby just said, like there's this 4-part singing that occurs at the end of the song, just a nice little tune. And in the video, it's like this Amish choir holding candles, I think, and singing. And some playing groups might do 4-part harmony, but Old Order Amish do not. And so that was a mild inaccuracy. But there's also a lot of dancing, very funny dancing, like dancing with butter churns, dancing
pretty provocatively with butter churns. There's a lot of hip movement involved.
But yeah, so the dancing and the 4-part harmony were the two I noticed.
Yeah, in addition to the feeding chickens pizza and milking a cow and directing the milk directly into the box of cornflakes, I noticed that a lot of the men had long hair. The beards were all very long, I think because probably it just looked interesting. And when they were dancing, there was lots of like flowing hair and beard movements. But, you know, not particularly accurate there. And the other one that was very clearly deliberate and also very clearly does not exist is the two Amish teenage boys who are looking at a magazine called Amish Babes. And they open up a centerfold, and it is an Amish woman displaying her ankle. All right, let's talk juxtapositions here. Weird Al has said that when he wanted to do a parody of Coolio's song, he thought of the Amish first because they are diametrical opposition to the gangsters depicted in Coolio's music video. And this is definitely true on a surface level, especially if you think of the Amish as sort of like a pinnacle of whiteness, which we discussed a little bit in our episode with Valerie Weaver-Zerker. And with that in mind, the Amish community does seem like it might be the opposite of the community that Coolio is talking and singing about. And that song sort of boils down to Black people singing about being unable to leave a bad situation. That's an oversimplification. Do you think the contrast between the original song and the parody song says something about the way that pop culture treats the Amish and the way pop culture treats Black people?
Yeah, I feel like we need like 3 weeks to wrestle with this question properly. But I guess as much as I love the song Amish Paradise, I wish it had been a parody of a different song, because Coolio's original song is a very dark and rather moving song. Like the opening line is, "As I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I take a look at my life and realize there's nothing left." So it's the song coming from this like place of desperation about a really hard life and a really hard lifestyle. And now we're laughing about Amish people. And it just feels a little icky. And it also, it's interesting to compare to Weird Al's other songs, which are for the most part parodies of much lighter songs. Like his most popular song is a parody of Chamillionaire's Ridin' Dirty, which he turned into White and Nerdy, or there's Beat It by Michael Jackson, which became Eat It. So I think he's very capable of choosing appropriate songs to parody. And I kind of just wish it had been a different song for this one. I don't know if that's a very profound thought, but that's what I was thinking about with this question.
I definitely agree with the racial undertones going on in this particular parody, because like Aaron said, Coolio's original Gangster's Paradise is a serious and award-winning song. It was both the song and the music video were very well received at the time and won some awards. And it does line up a lot with what we talked about in Valerie Weaver-Zerker's episode, where Amish can be an easier way to substitute to talk about white culture. Like Weird Al, I don't think would have ever considered just doing something about, you know, like white people as a way to contrast the Gangster's Paradise. So Amish gives a safe way of being like, well, I'm talking about white people, but I'm doing it in a more, I'm making it okay by making it about Amish. That said, I do think there's more. It isn't just about race. There are some, Gangster's Paradise is about a lot about the violence and the damage that does. And the Amish are known for their pacifist beliefs. So there are other ways that the contrasts, I think, work well. But I think it's really important to acknowledge some of the issues and the racial undertones. And I would say I am very curious as to whether I kind of doubt that Weird Al would necessarily choose to make this particular parody today, and if it would be as well received today as it was 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think it would be, if he wanted to do a parody of that song, he would have found a different subject. And if he wanted to do a parody song involving the Amish, he would have found a different song to parody today. The thing that I sort of kept coming back to when comparing the two songs is that in Gangsta's Paradise, it's this ironic statement. It's not actually a paradise. It's about people who are trapped in a system and dealing with issues of systemic racism and can't really get out. And when you flip over to Amish Paradise, it's about people who choose to be in a really weird environment, and they may not be able to leave really easily, but they are choosing to be there. And their paradise is, not what mainstream people would think of as a paradise, but it's something that they're still fairly content and happy in. So, reviews. Our scale this week is 1 to 5 crazy Mennonites. Erin, you go first.
Oh, well, my nostalgia for this song runs real deep. But then there's all the stuff we just talked about, like the sort of problems behind it. So that leaves me a little unsure of where to rate it. So maybe I'll just go with like a 4. So I love this song. I think it's a brilliant parody. But at the end of the day, I just kind of wish it had been a different song that he had parodied. And so I'll ding him 1 star for that and make it 4 out of 5. Crazy Mennonites.
I think I would be pretty similar in where I would come down on this. I would maybe say give the lyrics a 4 and the music video a 3, just to kind of parse out a little bit. Because I do think there's some really excellent parody work going on, the rhymes, the lyrics, and the music video is fun, but I think, and it will always have a special place in my heart, but I don't think it ages as well as the lyrics do.
I feel in a similar boat. I think I will have the song stuck in my head for at least another week. So musically, it's very catchy and the lyrics are funny and they'll be sticking in my head too. The music video is amusing, but it's the lyrics that I think and the song itself that really shine. So I'd say maybe 4 overall for humor and whimsy and catchiness. Well, that brings us to our next section of the podcast, where we will talk about some Mennonite moments. As a general reminder, if you are Mennonite and you do something that's amusing, or even if you do something that's not amusing, it's just inherently a Mennonite moment. They don't have to be about frugality or about our particular Swiss German Mennoniteness. So please share Mennonite moments and just remember that you get to define what makes something Mennonite.
So our first one is from Kim on Instagram. I got a mention in the budget after some Amish relatives visited with my folks during their vacation to Florida. Truly a thrill. I need to say 2 things. 1, yes, I agree. I would be thrilled to ever have a mention in the budget. And 2, if you don't know what the budget is, it is a rather amazing, it's like Amish Facebook. So it's the Sugar Creek budget. It comes out of Sugar Creek, Ohio. And on the surface, it's just your normal old small town newspaper. But then there's this like 1,000,000-page insert that is just Amish people, scribes, writing letters about what's happening in their community. And it's a lot of weather updates and a lot of like so-and-so came to visit and so-and-so died and so-and-so hosted church. And the 3 of us that have worked at the Mennonite Historical Library have sometimes had the pleasure, I would put that in quotes, of having to skim the entire Amish section of the budget to like find obscure periodicals or books that are mentioned to add to the collection. So we are very familiar with this periodical, and I think we're sort of loosely fans, but also kind of hate it.
I'm a little jealous you got mentioned.
Oh, totally jealous.
You did good, Kim. Carly, also on Instagram, writes in to tell us that she fixed her laundry basket handle using upcycled twist ties and copper wire from tractor innards salvaged by her father. I applaud the ingenuity.
Beth wrote us an email and shared this tip from a cousin. She wrote, when the jelly jar is about half empty, her father-in-law uses a fork to put a piece of bread in the jar. He then swabs it around the jar to get the last of the jelly. And I think that's an excellent way to clean out the jelly. Probably better than washing it out with water. But yeah, so I'm going to maybe have to use that tip next time.
I agree. I think that's a good one.
I have a Mennonite moment of my own. My friend Hannah was talking with me earlier, and we realized that we have a shared Mennonite moment that relates to sourdough. And that is when, at the beginning of COVID lockdowns, when everyone was first starting to go crazy over baking and sourdough, on my friend Hannah's behalf, I went to my second cousin's bakery, purchased some sourdough starter, and mailed it to my friend where she was living in Washington, D.C. She used it, grew the starter, gave some to her mother living in Indianapolis, who gave some to Erin, who is also using it. So this is like 3 families and like 5 people involved.
Well, and to add to that, I actually, when I went up to Goshen a couple weeks ago, took some of that same starter to a different friend. So it's made it back to Goshen, and I didn't have any idea of this connection until tonight. And I have to also maybe confess that I may have accidentally killed my starter because I was out of town for a couple weeks and forgot to tell my husband to feed it. So I might need you to mail me another one, Tilly.
I can do that. Sourdough moves in mysterious ways.
It does. We also have one confessional clarification, we'll call it. We got an email from Nick about coffee soup, which we've discussed in a couple episodes, our episode on True Confections, and then I think in our Mennonite Miscellany episode, we mentioned it again. But Nick informed us about some references in Pablo Yoder's books, and it's described as a piece of bread sprinkled with sugar, drenched with milk, garnished with a shot of black coffee. And it is also mentioned that this is a treat for children when they were sick, which I can't imagine really wanting coffee when I'm sick, but very interesting. So thank you for sharing that, Nick.
We also had a number of people respond to our most recent episode on Schitt's Creek and Third Rock from the Sun, getting a little upset that we didn't specifically call out the very famous Farm Witches line. And the reason was that mostly it was sort of a passing reference that didn't fit super well into our episode, but it is very funny. So a little bit of background here is this is a later episode of Schitt's Creek. While on a tour of the countryside to find vendors for David's business, Alexis comments that the brownie made by the Farm Witches is delicious, to which David responds, first of all, those are Mennonites. So we do think this line is funny, and
from now on we will refer to all Mennonites as farm witches, as I grew up attending
a farm witches school.
Yeah, Columbus Farm Witches Church.
Like Hogwarts, but for farm witches.
All right. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Just Plain Wrong. As always, we invite you to follow us on social media at Plain Wrong Pod and to let us know all of your thoughts about the podcast, various Mennonite moments, anecdotes, or whatever else you feel like telling us about.